So do you believe that things like ulcerative colitis or irritable bowel syndrome or some of these things that you were diagnosed with was kind of your body's way of stopping you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was unsustainable. It was just depleting my energy to live like I was living, just
That activation.
activated all the time and just thinking I needed to do more. And it was stressful. Just, like I said, I couldn't even really rest very well. So I think that was a natural consequence of being at that high arousal for so long. And I see that so much.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and today's guest is Betsy Jensen. And Betsy was on my podcast over a year ago. I think it was more than a year ago. I have to go back and look, but it will be linked in the show notes for sure, where you can go back and hear her story because her story is incredible. Every expert that I have has always come on and shared their story prior. And look, the reality is life is a series of experiences that are divinely designed for us. And Betsy is included in that. The listener is included in that. Everybody walks with some sort of shit, guys. Everybody has a story. And what I love about today's conversation with Betsy is that Betsy has this trade. She was trained as a physical therapist. Her education is in bodywork. Her education is helping people heal pain, but yet she had her own pain from her own experiences, which you'll learn about in that prior episode. Again, links in the bio and links in the show notes, where her own lived experiences, her adverse experiences growing up led to things like ulcerative colitis, IBS. And I think she'll have to tell me, went on kind of her own healing journey of like, what is this? Why? And really started to realize how much the body really does keep the score. So what I love about Betsy is her Instagram kills. It's so good. And I've known Betsy for a long time, and I've been following her on Instagram, and a couple of posts she did recently just really struck me as so powerful and profound and simple that I just knew I had to have her come back on the podcast so we can talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is this concept of feelings buried alive never die. And the other way to say that is the tears we keep, our bodies weep. So welcome, Betsy. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we always have such a good conversation.
Yeah, I feel like I could talk about this for hours. So I'm always happy to have people who want to talk about this stuff too.
When we were going behind the scenes before we got started, I had mentioned just coincidentally that today on Facebook, I posted a reel and on Instagram about adverse childhood experiences. For short, I call it ACEs. It's known as ACEs. Can lead in many ways to autoimmune. The autoimmune conditions I've been diagnosed with over the years, I'm 52. At 26, I was diagnosed with Raynaud's, but it really started when I was like 15 or 16 years old. So I kind of struggled for like 10 years until I actually got a diagnosis for that. And it's actually progressively gotten worse since I've turned into my 50s. And then the other thing I was diagnosed with at 48 was seronegative rheumatoid arthritis. So what that means is I had every single symptom of rheumatoid arthritis, and I had great inflammation in my nervous system and in my body, where it showed up as a C-reactive protein number on my blood work. But I actually didn't test positive for the titer for rheumatoid arthritis. So they call that seronegative. But I myself have been struggling over the years with different ailments that quote unquote didn't make sense because nobody else in my family had them. Mm-hmm. But I knew in my heart and in my soul and from all the research I've ever done, I had a great propensity for and a high likelihood of being diagnosed with these things. You have ulcerative colitis. I don't want to say you have it. You've been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and IBS. What kind of journey did that take you on?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really interesting. As I look back, I probably had some chronic pains here and there, but I didn't really consider it like someone who has chronic pain. But I had some rib pain that lasted even a couple of years and some back pain, but it didn't really limit me. And I think as a physical therapist, I knew kind of how to deal with it and how to do the exercises and make it so that I wasn't living with chronic pain, but my digestive system was really affected. And just from the constant stress, I was actually raised in an environment where my ACEs score was really low. I have a really great family, but from a very religious community in Utah, which I think my nervous system interpreted the constant danger as like me never being good enough and always needing to be more perfect in order to feel safe. Being a mom who worked, that was really hard on my nervous system because I never felt like I was a really good mom because I was working. And I was just really hard on myself, really critical. I was the kind of person that couldn't even take a compliment. And that was actually affecting my body, my digestion. And so it was during my divorce that I found out I was already getting into coaching, just general life coaching. I was really into figuring out how my thoughts affected my emotions and my results. And that all really made sense. But during my divorce, my symptoms really got bad and flared. And someone told me about this mind-body connection. And I was already a psychology major before I did physical therapy. And I just love the mind-body idea. But to actually have now research-based tools that I could use. And it went right along with what I was learning in coaching about my thoughts, my emotions. But it was more the subconscious thoughts, the subconscious emotions I didn't even realize I was having. But it was, basically my nervous system was constantly dysregulated. And I never really felt like I was safe in that sense, as far as like, I'm good enough. I've done enough. I can just relax and have a good night's sleep. I would like make lists to go to sleep at night of what I would do the next day. I was just so high strung, constantly stressed. And I thought that was just like how people live. That's just normal. Once I heard that you could address all of these conditions, especially even ulcerative colitis and digestive things, which makes sense, by the way, right? When you're in fight or flight, your digestion turns off, right? Your digestion is the least of your priorities when you're in a survival state. So it totally made sense to me. And I was actually one of those people who was really happy to find out that the mind-body option would work for me. Like some people, they get offended if you say, okay, this is because of your thoughts and your feelings. And for me, I was like, great, that's great news because I know I can change those.
People understand the how and the why, because I think some people listen and they're like, that doesn't make any sense to me. It sounds too woo. So let's give them a little bit of the science behind what's happening. So I'll start and then maybe you can pick up. When we are in this constant state of threat, so even like you were saying, Betsy, there was this sense inside of you that nothing was ever enough, right? Yeah. And somewhere that was a thought and a condition and a set of core beliefs that you adopted early on in life. Is that fair to say?
Yes, probably, 5 or younger. I was kind of trained to believe, and not that this is what the church teaches, but, just kind of how I interpreted it was like, I've got to be a better person all the time and I'm just not good enough.
And I really want to paint this picture for the listener. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and then you just answer. So you mentioned that you were part of a very conservative fundamental religion. In that particular religion, was it just kind of the common understanding that men were the value and women had less value in that religion?
Yeah, I would say it's more of a patriarchal type of organization, and women, have their roles, which is more being the mother and the caretaker. And they've actually found a lot of people with chronic pain. One of the personality traits is having this strong sense of duty. And so I was the kind of person who, if I walked into a room, would gauge how everyone else was doing and put my attention on what is this person thinking and what could they be feeling, and neglecting my own self.
Right. So anybody that's listened to the podcast knows, my particular philosophies on big trauma and little trauma, but for people that are new, let me just roll it out really easy. So when we talk about trauma, let's just talk about the idea of like a wound, right? And we can get wounded in a lot of different ways. We can be wounded physically from abuse and assault and aggression, but we can also feel wounded emotionally in our childhood when we're just living in an environment where we don't feel good enough, important enough, significant enough. That feels like a lack of safety in the nervous system, because as human beings, we're hardwired for connection. So if we're in a scenario where we don't feel enough, that feels like a threat to our connection, which could feel like as big of a threat as like food scarcity or not feeling safe with a roof over your head. It is part of our birthright. So if we do not feel safe in our being, able to connect, to Betsy's point, you're in this hypervigilant zone where you are assessing and scanning every single moment. Are they happy with me? Because if they're not, I might lose connection. Not good enough. Are they content with the way I'm doing things? Am I doing things the right way? Am I doing things enough? Should I be prioritizing those person's needs over mine? So none of this is conscious, to Betsy's point when she was talking about the subconscious before. It's all a sensation. It's all a feeling. It's all an instinct. And it's an observation. So you don't have to come out of violence and aggression and abuse or a war-torn scenario in order to have an activated nervous system. Just not feeling enough can be enough, which is a big thing for people to swallow. And it's a hard thing for people to swallow because most of us grew up in environments that were dysfunctional, right? We're just a byproduct of what our parents were able to do and what their parents were able to do. Yeah. So when we're in this threat, the amygdala goes on. And when our amygdala in our brain is triggered, our body must respond in kind. So given that you're the expert on the body part, what happens, Betsy, when that amygdala gets triggered? What happens inside the body?
Yeah, definitely with fight or flight, there's more adrenaline and cortisol. So I would feel like I couldn't rest very well. If I would lay down to rest, my mind would go to like all the things I didn't do and what I needed to still do. And your muscles get tighter. Your digestion turns off. It can affect anything from your hormones to inflammation to your immune system. So for me, the big presenting thing was my digestion. And I was just, thinking I just had to be on medicines and change my diet. But that wasn't even working because it wasn't solving the core problem, which was I was never getting to that safe or that rest and repair state. I was always in like flight is this perfectionism, urgency, trying to do more. And then also you can also go into freeze and fawn, which is like when it's just so overwhelming and your body's so tired from being in this high activated state all the time, you get to kind of this hopeless state of freeze where you're like, I can't be good enough. And then there's, that has more of a shutdown. So you can feel fatigue and you can feel like you're dissociated from life, just going through the motions of life, but not really having a lot of, enjoyment or connection. I just thought something was wrong with me, that I just wasn't a happy person. I was like, I don't know why I feel like this, but it must just be something wrong with me.
So one of the things that I've learned, I've been studying something called parts work through a polyvagal lens. And polyvagal theory was developed by Steve Porges, but there are a lot of people who have built upon this theory. People like Janina Fisher, there's a woman named Ruth Culver, and they've created this great imagery to explain what you just described. And if anybody's interested, I would Google Ruth Culver and look for the Survive to Thrive spiral. So have you seen this, Betsy?
No, I haven't.
So
I'm
it's
going to write
really
that down
interesting.
too.
It's an image that she created during COVID, actually. And it
Ah,
kind of described from a neuroscience perspective and from a nervous system perspective what you just described, which is when we're in flow, we are fully capable. We're unshakable. We feel safe and secure. We feel safe and secure in how we engage. So we're not in that hypervigilant mode where we're scanning and we're looking. We just know showing up as us is more than enough. And we can call that flow. We can call that authenticity. We can call that in parts work, it would be known as self-leadership, but you're rooted in your core and it's good and you feel good about it.
I call it alignment too, which I think is funny as a physical therapist because alignment meant perfect posture and perfectionism, but alignment with yourself, with your true being.
That's right. And the idea is that we have this core essence, and in parts work, the core essence has a set of qualities that you can look for where you feel confident and courageous and calm and curious and creative and clear. And you're just being, and that is more than enough. And you can do anything. And then something happens and we need to act. So activation is required and we mobilize in order to do, and we go from I can to I must, right? There's this sense of urgency. And in that mode, we're in that fight or flight mode. And the theory is, if you're in this fight or flight mode, if you're in this mobility mode, this activation mode for an extended period of time, there's a message that gets sent to the body of it's never going to be enough to be in this mode. It's not sustainable and it's not going to work. And if you, this is not a conscious thought, but if you're going to stay at this, you're going to die, right? Because you can't sustain this level of cortisol, this level of adrenaline.
Yeah.
So then you flop.
Yeah.
Right? So the idea is we're heightened. And oh my God, I can't take one more piece of heightened. And so I completely collapse, flop. That's where we get the submit. This is where we get the freeze and the fawn, right? And you can think of it in like the bear setting. Like everybody talks about running from a bear. If you're walking peacefully in the woods and you're fully in alignment and you're grounded and you're centered and you're just loving everything that's happening, and all of a sudden you hear the rustle behind you and you think, I need to activate. You turn around, you see there's a bear. Oh shit, I need to run. All this stuff is pulling up inside your system. But there will be a point if you're running from the bear that you're going to make this conscious decision of, I'm either going to keep running or I'm going to play dead.
Yeah.
And I probably can't run much more. So I'm just going to flop, collapse, submit, play dead, freeze, and pray to fucking God that this bear goes by me. So when people come to me and they say, I'm depressed, I'm lethargic, I have no motivation, I have no energy, I'm procrastinating, I'm numb, I'm all these things, it's an indicator to me we're in flop, we're in collapse. Some people call it dorsal vagal. Okay. Some people call it hypoarousal, depending on the model. But the idea is you've been at this heightened state. Nobody is flopping without being in this heightened state first. So do you believe that things like ulcerative colitis or irritable bowel syndrome or some of these things that you were diagnosed with was kind of your body's way of stopping you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was unsustainable. It was just depleting my energy to live like I was living, just
that activation,
activated all the time and just thinking I needed to do more. And it was stressful. Just, like I said, I couldn't even really rest very well. So I think that was a natural consequence of being at that high arousal for so long. And I see that so much. I've coached a lot of physicians, and that's exactly their pattern of being a high achiever and going through med school. And, you do all these things. And then at some point feeling like, wow, this is all just too much. This is unsustainable. And then going into flop or freeze, like our society doesn't really promote that, or like fight and flight. There's a little bit more like, oh, that's kind of good. Oh, you're working 80 hours. Oh, good for you. You're a perfectionist. That's the kind of employee we want. But then when you're in flop or freeze, you're just like, what's wrong with me? Like, here I am, just like, I need to lay in bed and I don't want to do anything. And it feels really counter, like what we're told we're supposed to be doing. And so I think it's kind of scary for a lot of people to have that end of the hypoarousal come up.
Absolutely. And do you believe that actually the flop and the collapse is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It is a normal response. And that's what we want to see with our nervous system. Is my nervous system wasn't broken. It was working. It was working really well. It was working too well. Right. But we just want to have a nervous system that can go in and out of these states, so that when the bear isn't there anymore, we go back to the rest and repair state and that relaxed state. But what most people do is they go straight from flight down to freeze and flop. And then to get out of it, they try to go back into flight. And I'll just, do exercise every day for an hour for 30 days, anything that sounds really idealistic and perfectionistic and it's unsustainable. We're just going from like freeze to flight and then back to freeze again.
So I have like a million thoughts in my mind about how I work with clients, but I'm not, as a coach, I feel like my specialty is like, it's like the fine surgery of like going in and helping. It's almost like, that game of Operator.
Yeah.
Remember that game Operation where you had the body and you had to be like really careful with like the little tweezer, because if you hit the side, it would. Okay, so I kind of feel like I'm the surgeon in that game of Operation, but like what I'm trying to help carefully take out are unhealed emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes,
and so I'm constantly carefully, like with a fine tooth comb, like going in and like helping the person identify these unhealed wounds and help them pull them out and look at them and process them, heal them, and then put them back or put them wherever they're meant to be. So I know how I do my jazz. Tell me how you work with clients who are constantly flowing in and out of these states that are then leading to, I'm assuming, a lot of chronic pain, a lot of chronic fatigue, a lot of autoimmune. We always hear, oh, this job is killing me. It's so toxic, it made me sick.
I can't.
But what people don't realize, it actually could be the environment. Sometimes it's not the environment. Sometimes it's the way you're working in the environment.
Yes, exactly. That's how I think I was. Cause like I said, I had a good family. I had good, I have a house. I have good things in my life. I wasn't in a survival danger, but my body was reacting like I was because I had learned to be so hard on myself. And that was just how I operated. I didn't realize there were even any choices there. So yeah, absolutely. People are, we're taught things as children that we absorb. We even intergenerational trauma. We know that, there's that really cool example with, I'll just tell it really quickly. They were shocking the mice's feet when they were smelling a smell of cherry blossoms. And then later, when the mice had babies, they weren't even pregnant then when they were getting those shocks, but the babies, when they smelled that smell, produced cortisol. So I think, I come from a lot of generations,
right?
Of like religious people who were really trained to be productive and good. And, that Judeo-Christian Puritan work ethic. And so I think I just had a lot of, natural responses just from my genetics even. So what I do is I help people identify. It's like learning this vocabulary and learning how that feels in your body. Like the feeling of flight has a really different feeling than the feeling of freeze. And so I do a lot of somatic or body work, which is basically it might sound a little weird or hokey, but it's having people just close their eyes and tell me what they're feeling in their body. And we can connect that with certain emotions and even certain things that people were taught when they were young. I just had a client that was, her dad was an angry person. So she had this adverse reaction to anger. She never wanted to express anger. And then she was also taught like her emotions weren't valid. So if she ever cried, he would always just say, stop crying and, buck up or whatever. It was just this kind of attitude of like emotions aren't allowed. And so now she's struggling with all of this dysregulation because when she has emotion, her body's treating it like there's something really wrong. We've got to suppress it. We've got to, and then she'll push down her anger and then it'll blow up and then she feels really bad. So it's so much just education with what's going on with the nervous system, how that feels in the body. And each nervous system's a little different because of, even my siblings, they don't have the same exact kind of reaction, even though we were raised in a similar environment. So it's more, like you said, the fine tuning and getting at that root, getting down to that. What is that thing for you that is really activating? Sometimes I do some inner child work and we imagine, the 5-year-old me that was yelled at when I did something wrong and how bad I felt and how I internalized that and, those types of things. So I try to just work with the person with what they're dealing with, because we could have identical situations and one person reacts with fear to it and another person doesn't.
100%. And I'm sure you hear this. I definitely hear this. It's not uncommon for clients to say to me, well, I'm one of 3 siblings or I'm one of 4 or whatever. And each one of us has reacted differently. And what you're really saying is each one of us developed a different set of coping strategies.
Yes, exactly. Because that's what these are. Our nervous system at a young age learns to cope with our fears and our perceived danger in certain ways. And then in the future, it's not going to be that same, it wasn't the dad yelling, but it could be any anger coming up. And then she goes into this shutdown mode. So that's what I help people realize is what's going on with their nervous system. I feel like it's just like when I started with understanding coaching, I learned about emotions and I learned all of this vocabulary to distinguish, okay, am I irritated or am I angry or am I furious or am I annoyed? They're all a little different, right? And so I felt like once I had all that vocabulary with emotions, I was really able to understand myself so much better. And I feel like that's what I do now with the nervous system with people is teach them, okay, when you're in fight, it's normal to be really annoyed with people, to feel like you're a victim, to see people's imperfections. And once you see this whole pattern of, okay, this is how fight is, this is how flight is. When I get into freeze, I know that I'm just going to feel sad about everything and think that nothing's good enough. And once you can identify it, just even having the vocabulary to identify it, it actually was the thing that helped me with compassion for myself the very most. Because learning about coaching, we talk about self-compassion, but it was really hard for me to feel compassionate with myself because I just thought I should be better. I just thought, well, why is this so hard for me? How come I'm just not getting it? Like in my head, I would get it, but then I would still show up the same ways because I wasn't really internalizing it. So for me, it actually brought so much self-compassion to know, okay, this is happening at a subconscious level. It's happening because of factors I don't even know about anymore, but this is where it is. So I can meet myself where I'm at. I'm in freeze. I don't like that I went into freeze over sending an email. That doesn't seem like a survival state or, a survival kind of
activity,
like a circumstance that should cause, me to feel like I'm being chased by a bear. But because, I want people to like me, my nervous system is thinking this is really dangerous to send this email out. So I've gone through so much of this, just realizing this with myself, like, okay, here I am in freeze again. And how can I be compassionate with myself to get out of it versus just trying to beat myself up and thinking like, okay, I've just got to, push myself harder. Like that wasn't working.
I think the awareness is absolutely a number one crucial, right? And I think,
Yes.
like you said, the language is so important because in my own practice, I've met so many people who have said, well, that just made me feel really bad. And I was like, can you elaborate on that? They're like, I really can't. And then I have like a bunch of different, like, I'm going to actually pull one here. I have all of these different like little tools, right? So this is like a basic needs chart, but I have other charts that look like this. And one of them is body sensation to emotion, and one of them is just emotion. And I have them laminated, and I have like little expo markers. And I'll say, okay, you said that that made you feel bad, or you feel bad, or you felt sick to your stomach when you were sending the email.
Yes.
Just take this sheet right now and take this expo marker and just look at the words and just start checking off the words that speak to you. And all of a sudden they're like fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, worry about what other people are going to think, all these different things. And now they have some language. And now as the coach, you can say, okay, if you were to send that email and they didn't like what you had to say, then what? Well, then they might be upset with me. And then what? And then they may not like me. And then what? Then I'm going to be alone. Like it goes all the way to this extreme.
Yes.
So quickly, once they have the language, and then they can say, okay, so now I can see that part of the problem here is that I'm worried about being alone. And I'm worried about being alone. Why? Right. Yeah. And this is where you're talking about subconscious. I do a lot of subconscious work. We can start to tap into the part of them that's unhealed, that felt alone at a crucial time that's yet to be healed.
Yes.
I know personally for me, with my own experiences growing up, I was in a very hypervigilant mode all the time. I had a great deal of sadness. I had a great deal of confusion. I had a great deal of feeling alone in my circumstance because a lot of what I was experiencing, I felt my reality was being denied to me. And so I was very much on my own in a lot of it. And, 48 years old, walking around with this debilitating pain in my joints. I would literally wake up and get out of bed and just start to cry and say to my husband, I feel like I just pitched 9 innings of a baseball game in my shoulder and I haven't even gotten out of bed yet. Like that was the level of pain I was in. Yeah. And then the fatigue was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. So, what I realized is that even though I had done so much work between the ages of 15 and 35, here I was at 48 thinking I've processed it, but it was very clear to me that there was so much left unresolved that needed to be healed internally.
Yes.
And I personally ended up going to an acupuncturist for that. I think I even spoke to you around this time, I remember, and did some really intense healing with somebody that didn't do just acupuncture, but also did Reiki at the same time. And there was just a lot that was shifting in me energetically where I started to feel emotions literally on the table. Like I was having like little epiphanies and recognizing that there were parts of me that were still really feeling very sad. And that was just sitting in literally the fiber of my being, like in my muscle, in my joints, in my bones. And that was causing extreme exhaustion. And honestly, once I was able to do that kind of really deep work, even through body work, I literally reversed my numbers. Like you could see it shift on the paper. I went from a C-reactive protein level of 10 to 2.9.
Wow. Yeah.
Over like a period of like a year. I was very consistent with it, but I couldn't not. And I didn't want to take the medication. There was something they wanted to prescribe me steroids for this. This is when it was the seronegative rheumatoid arthritis.
Mm-hmm.
But instinctively, I knew this diagnosis doesn't make a lot of sense for my family history, but it does make a lot of sense for my lived experience. Because I knew enough about ACEs to know at that time there's something deeper here. And if I take the medication, not that I'm anti-medication, because I'm absolutely not, but for me personally, I was like, if I take this medication, I'm putting a Band-Aid over a bullet wound. And if I don't get to the root cause of this, I'm going to be stuck on this medication for the rest of my life.
Yes, absolutely. And that it involves going into the emotions and just realizing that you can feel all of these emotions. And there are ways of processing emotion, but subconsciously, we may just be repressing emotions. And none of this was explained to me at first when I was doing coaching. And there's a lot of emphasis on changing your thoughts. And I was like, why can't I just change my thoughts? Because, it sounds so easy and it sounds like all these other people are able to do it. But yeah, when you have, it's kind of like just a worldview that, I'm not safe to be me, then it's like your nervous system will be working against you when you try to change your thoughts. So
I agree.
Yeah.
And, we're both very familiar with this model that we're talking about, which is you have a circumstance and then you have a set of thoughts and then you have feelings. And based on those feelings, you have actions. And based on those actions, you have an outcome, right? Or a result. Yeah. And the missing piece for me in that model is the core beliefs. Right. Or like you said, the universal belief of what is driving the thought? Because if you have somebody that does feel safe in who they are, the thought's going to be very different.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, think of a circumstance where somebody, just using safety as an example, if somebody believes, this is a core belief, safety is available to me, versus somebody else who believes it's my job to make sure everybody else feels good and that secures my safety. If they both walk into a room and people don't turn around, the person who feels safe and secure in who they are might think nothing of it actually at all, or may just think, oh, those people look really busy. Let me see what they're doing. Yeah. Whereas the other person who feels a lack of safety and security in themselves and feel it is their job to make sure everyone's happy so they feel safe and secure, may automatically go to the thought process of no one's turning around because they don't want me here.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. And sometimes our cognitive mind can understand that and it can be so frustrating. And that's where I got so far with traditional coaching. It really, really, really helped. But then there was this missing piece that was how come sometimes I can't just change my thoughts? It seems like it should be easy. And I have all these new thoughts I want to believe, but there was something at my core, our nervous system is trying to protect us. And if we've had some hurts and some, threats before, then at that subconscious level, it's just going to be protecting us. It's kind of like if you've had food poisoning and then in the future you think about that food again and you start to get that reaction. And so if we can, retrain the nervous system to react differently and keep enforcing messages of safety and the somatic feeling of safety, getting to that more and more, then all of those things, it's like just pulling a string and it just unravels. It's so much easier than trying to, change this thought and this thought and this thought and this thought. It's like we get to the core of this nervous system state I keep going into protectively and how to regulate out of that. And then all of these mysteries just, they're solved.
I agree. So from a somatic point of view, mind-body coaching point of view, do you see a lot of people with autoimmune?
Yeah, definitely. What's interesting right now, there's kind of I'll just explain it like this. There are some teachers like Gabor Mate, he talks a lot about autoimmune. And then the pain reprocessing. So this is more for the chronic pain. So say you have, a bulging disc, but it bothers you every once in a while or constantly, or you have things like IBS or fibromyalgia or headaches. Those are all kind of traditional chronic pain type of things. So right now, there's a lot of research supporting and going into this pain reprocessing for these type of things that are very identifiable. And autoimmune is this kind of gray area in the pain reprocessing world. And so I love that I have this experience of having autoimmune that has been reversed. I don't no longer have any active disease. And it does turn out that there are a lot of people that I've worked with that have reversed autoimmune, or sometimes they've even done it before they come to me. But definitely, I feel like in the next 10 years, research will be out there that just proves that as our nervous system affects our immune system, that's why our immune system starts attacking itself for autoimmune. But still, there is, the way they describe it is, with autoimmune, there can be some tissue changes, some tissue damage. So be followed by a doctor. And maybe for me, I had some ulcers, right? And I had to take some medicine to heal those ulcers in addition to doing the mental and the emotional work. But so it's a kind of interesting question, because I feel like autoimmune is so prevalent, and I can't wait for there to be more research about that. So it's more accepted that this is from stress. This is from mind body. This is from your immune system attacking itself. Because when they have this really mysterious, they're like, I don't know why this happens. That's a good clue that it's mind body, because the medical system doesn't understand this.
Okay. So listen, guys, we're at 40 minutes and I have like 5 more questions for Betsy. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up this interview. And we're going to consider this a part 1 of a 2-part series where we're talking about the mind-body connection, how it, relates to your nervous system. So if you're loving this, you're just going to roll into the next episode. But I'm going to cut this one off here just for time. But if you are interested in what Betsy does and you're curious, Betsy, tell them how they can best find you.
Okay. Yeah. Go to bodyandmindlifecoach.com for my website. And then I have some free nervous system modules. So the education that I've done all about how your nervous system affects your body and how to regulate it. So there's a link that you can click on to get the free nervous system modules, just so you know the vocabulary and understand how this works together. Of course, your nervous system affects all of your systems of your body, because that's what gets you out of the dangerous situation. So my website, I also have a lot of content that I put onto Instagram. And so my Instagram, I think, is Body and Mind Life Coach also. And my YouTube channel, you could follow me there. I try to post similar things in all these different places. So, you can find me on Facebook and TikTok.
Awesome. And guys, we will have all the links in the show notes. But again, it's Betsy Jensen, Jensen. And she is a somatic life coach. And you're going to check out all the links in the show notes, and you're going to be looking for part 2. Thanks for joining.